Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today I'm pleased to welcome one of the most talented and accomplished comedy geniuses in the entertainment world. He's literally done it all. He's an actor, playwright, and a highly respected television writer and producer. He's worked with everyone from Bob Newhart to Don Rickles, Brook Shields, Jamie Lee Curtis, Olympia Dukakis, Elaine Stritch, Penny Marshall. The list goes on and on. And if that weren't enough, he's written a best-selling memoir about his television career called Get in the Car, Jane, Adventures in the TV Wasteland. And it is hands down the most hilarious book about show business that I have ever read. What a thrill to welcome Billy Van Zandt to our show. Billy, thank you so much for joining us.
Wow, it was worth it just for that introduction. That's fantastic. Thank you.
I meant every word.
Okay, great.
Now, for those faithful viewers who watch our show regularly, Billy is the author of the essay about meeting and working with Lucille Ball that appeared in Bruce Ferber's book, The Way We Work. And when Bruce was on our show and I told him how much I loved Billy's Lucy essay, Bruce promised to convince Billy to come on our show. So thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Billy, for saying yes. And thank you, Lucy, for inspiring Billy to devote his life to comedy, because she really was your inspiration, wasn't she?
Absolutely. When I was just a little kid, that was the thing that spoke to me was her show. And probably the Lucy show too, but mostly I Love Lucy. And there was something that connected with me comedically, I think. I think all comedy is sort of a rhythm. It's a musical thing that you hear. There was something about that, the cadence of that show, the spirit of that show that spoke to me as a kid. And that was, I immediately knew I wanted to do that. I didn't know how to do that or where to do that, but I knew I wanted to do that. And I started studying every speck of that show. The writers taught me how to write a script. The actors taught me timing. Jess Oppenheimer and Desi Arnaz taught me, I didn't know it at the time, but they taught me how to produce too. And as the years went on, I started studying a little more, and I started imitating shamelessly stuff from that show. Yeah, that's the reason I got into the business. Yeah.
Well, while we're on the subject of Lucy, you and your writing partner, Jane Milmore, were nominated for an Emmy Award in 1990 for your CBS special, I Love Lucy, the very first show. It was the highest rated show of the season. It's amazing how you obtained the footage of the original pilot episode 10 months after Lucy died. Billy, it's really clear from your book that it would be impossible to overstate the impact that Lucy had on your career.
Yeah, in fact, all along the way, you'll find similarities or coincidences that harken back to Lucy for some reason. The pilot was so interesting. We had just started a development deal with Grant Tribune, and Bud Grant was the president of the company, and his girlfriend studied dance when she was a kid with Joanne Perez, who was Pepito the clown's wife. So Bud Grant and his girlfriend were over at this Joanne Perez's house for Thanksgiving once. And after dinner, they started showing home movies. And what they sat there and watched was the pilot to I Love Lucy that had been lost for 40 years. This woman apparently didn't know what she had because there were no other copies anywhere. So we went to CBS and they said, well, we own that. And we said, yeah, we know, but we have the footage. And they said, well, we'll take it, we'll cut it down to 22 minutes and air it as a half-hour special. And we said, no, you're not doing that. You need to show the entire thing. It's historical. And they said, well, what are we going to do with the extra, minutes? And I said, we'll put together the telling of how the show came to be. I said, and I had all the interviews with Lucy and Desi, and everything was stuck in my head anyway. So I knew I could put the story of I Love Lucy together through old footage. And then I figured Bob, Carol, and Madeline Davis, I'd interview them. They were the writers. And that would fill out our whole hour. So we went back to CBS and basically held them hostage until they agreed to the special. Otherwise, we would never have given them the footage. And we put the special together. The other thing we did to CBS, which was sort of mean, is we didn't give them any footage to advertise because there was a similarity in story from what they did in the pilot to an episode they had done a year later on I Love Lucy. And I didn't want the people at home to think, oh, I already saw this. So we didn't give them any footage at all. And they did not like me there. The advertising people had to really do a really brilliant job of whetting the audience's appetite of what's in that pilot. And I think we gave them 10 seconds of footage of her walking with a lampshade on her head, and that's all they had. So everybody tuned in to watch it. And it turned out great. We got Lucy Yarnez to host it, and we started negotiating with Carol Burnett. In the middle of it all, Lucy and Desi Jr. had to read our script to approve the images of her parents being used, all that sort of thing. And once she read the script, she called up and she said, I want to host this because no one's ever paid tribute to my father in the entire television industry. No one pays tribute to my father, and you're doing that. So she came in and hosted, and she was fantastic. And my favorite part of the whole thing was at the end when the credits ended, that I Love Lucy heart ended, closed, and you saw it produced by Billy Van Zandt and Jane Milmore in that heart. It was like, that was worth doing it. That was great.
That's what you call karma.
Yeah.
Billy, your book is so entertaining. I hated to see it come to an end.
Uh,
Bruce Ferber tells me that he had to really urge you to write it. Why did you need so much encouragement when you had all of these amazing stories inside you that the world really needed to hear?
I started writing this a long time ago. It was basically for my kids. So, because when they were younger, they knew I made TV shows. They didn't know what that meant. So one day I sat down and I started writing, and I wrote it just to explain to my kids what Daddy did at the office, really. I put the book together and I started to get it published maybe 10 years ago. My lawyer called up and said, you can't publish this. I said, why? He said, you're going to get sued by 10 people by page 3. I said, really? And he said, yeah, you cannot name specifically the development guy at Warner Brothers. You cannot name the cameraman. They're all entitled to privacy. You can say what you want about celebrities, but you can't talk about the behind the scenes people. He said, so why don't you just write it as a fiction? I said, I don't want to write it as a fiction. So I just said, oh, forget it. And I shoved it on a shelf. Bruce called me out of the blue about a year before he published his book. And he said, he explained what he was doing, an anthology of working in Hollywood. And he said, do you remember that thing you wrote about Lucy? Because he had read the original book. And I said, yeah. He said, can I publish it? I said, well, I have to clean things up first. And I went in and I cleaned things up, sent it to him. And I went, that wasn't that tough to do. Let me look at another chapter. And then I started doing chapter by chapter and went, oh, I can do this. I finally put the thing together. If Bruce hadn't asked me, I don't think this book would have been written.
Well, I want to ask you about your parents. You wrote that they did not encourage you to go into show business. You said that your dad said that show business people are drunks, drug addicts, or bums. Did he ever come around when he saw how successful you became?
Yes, in a second. My brother paved the way because he was a musician, which was worse. And once Stephen's playing Madison Square Garden and stuff like that, my father was like, I don't think he still understood the music, but he was like, he appreciated that. And when I started, Stephen, my brother, had paved the way of all the disdain from my father about show business. And so when I said I'm going to be an actor, it was like, well, it's not as bad as being a musician, so it wasn't that bad.
Most of your acting career has been on the stage, but you did co-star in a number of big movies, including the Star Trek movie, Jaws 2, Taps. I want to ask you, why did Jaws 2 take 11 months to film? What took so long?
Well, the shark, basically. No, actually, I was cast in the show. We had a month of rehearsal up in Martha's Vineyard with John Hancock, the director, and Dorothy Tristan, his wife, who wrote the script. And after about 3 weeks of rehearsal, we shot maybe 3 days worth of footage. That was it. And all of a sudden, they sent us all home, and they shut down production. And they fired John Hancock and Dorothy Tristan. Why? I still don't know. There's a lot of talk that it was too dark. They wanted a lighter, kid-friendly movie to make more money. So a month was lost, and then I spent a month at home, and then I got a phone call saying we're now starting up in Florida. So here's the flight. You'll be down there. So I show up in Florida. There's a new director. Carl Gottlieb is on as a writer now. And there's an entirely new cast of people that I'm performing with, except for Roy Scheider and Lorraine Gary and Jeff Kramer. But we started from scratch. And poor Carl Gottlieb had to rewrite this film in real time as we were shooting it, which is insane. I didn't appreciate it at the time because I wasn't a full-time writer at that time. But whatever we were shooting tomorrow, he was in the hotel room writing today. But he pulled off a fantastic feat to do that. And Janot Swark, who directed it, most directors get a full year of prep on a movie at least. He got 2 weeks, and he was great. I always say the audiences don't care what went into the backstory of how you got a movie the way it is, or a play or anything. They just want to be entertained. But if they knew the Herculean feat that Carl and Janot pulled off, you would love that movie much more than you do right now. So I lost 3 months. It was really an 8-month shoot. And a lot of that was also having to do with the fact that the shark would break every once in a while, or if it would start raining, we had to stop. And we also had to work around the fact that the locals didn't like us being there.
So let's talk about your writing. You and your writing partner, Jane Milmore, are one of the most successful comedy writing teams in show business history. You've co-written 23 plays and, by my count, 16 TV series. What is it that drives your sense of humor?
I don't even think about it. I just wake up and I go straight to the computer and start writing. I've always got to create.
What I find fascinating is that you and Jane started out as lovers, but after the romance broke up, you stayed together as writing partners. You were able to reinvent yourselves as best friends to the point that when she started dating somebody else, she actually felt comfortable enough to tell you that he was the first good-looking guy she'd ever dated. The chemistry between the two of you must have been amazing.
We finished each other's sentences. We were together 46 years altogether. Yeah, we thought as one after a while.
So what are the best and the worst things about writing with a partner?
The best thing is you are not alone, and you have, because there's nothing more insecure than a writer turning in a script to somebody, and if they don't call you 3 seconds later to say it's good, you panic. What did I do wrong? They must hate it. Well, the guy had another thing to do. He didn't read it yet. Jane and I we trusted each other implicitly. So if I could make her laugh and she could make me laugh, we knew it was the right thing. So we had each other's back. We divvied up the work that most people have to go through. So Jane would deal with studio people. So Jane would deal with all the business part of that. And I would deal with the writers in the writer's room. I would deal with the director and the editor, and Jane would deal with any prima donnas we had to work with. She went down to the set to deal with certain people.
And what was the worst part about having a partner, other than having to transition from lovers to best friends?
I made half the money I would have made if I was by myself.
Billy, you started writing for TV when you had already proven yourself as a successful playwright. You wrote Love, Sex, and the IRS, was hugely successful, productions all around the world. Then you went to television. My question to you is this: what did it feel like to write a script that you were happy with, only to have it ripped to shreds, thrown in the garbage, or rewritten by people who were higher up on the food chain, but who had absolutely no understanding of comedy?
First of all, the transition from playwright to sitcom writer was easy. After you do a 2-hour play, writing 22 minutes of comedy for TV, you can do that overnight.
You can do that overnight.
Well, I can do that. I have done that overnight. But so that part was easy. The Bob Newhart show was the first time we worked on a writing staff. And it was very difficult for me, not so much for Jane, because she was used to me saying, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to do it. I took control. I was the one at the typewriter. So I was the one at the computer. So I got the last word all the time. So Jane was used to people saying no to her. I wasn't used to that. The only people that ever said no to me really were the audience. When we would do a show, if something wasn't working, you pay attention and you fix it. But when we started writing for the Newhart show, I think I say this in the book, I had somebody make an entrance and said the word hello, and they changed it to hi. The writer, the bosses changed it to hi. And I went nuts over that. It's like, why is that better than what I just wrote? It's no different at all. You're changing things just for the sake of changing things. And it took me probably 2 years, about 2 years to get over myself and realize it's not your show, Billy. It's just not your show. And when it's your show, you can do what you want. But until then, your job as a writer on a TV show is to imitate the writing style of whoever's created that show. so you don't have different voices every week, you know.
Well, I want to pursue that a bit more with you. You worked on a brand new show called Anything But Love, starring Jamie Lee Curtis and Richard Lewis.
Yeah.
You and Jane ended up quitting the show when one of your scripts was ruined by an executive producer, and you suggest in your book that you regretted leaving the show. Why?
Oh, it was a stupid move. I was young, and my ego got in the way because it was a top 10 show. We were on the writing staff. We were also in the cast. Peter Noah, to get us to write for his show, gave us little parts on the show as actors. It started out great, and suddenly we would stay there till 4 a.m, changing things around, and I didn't. It was like, what was wrong with what I wrote? And it all built into one ridiculously, in hindsight, stupid moment where they had changed the big climactic scene in a show we had written. He threw it out and wanted to write something different. And it was like, but we've spent the entire show dropping seeds to build up to that moment. And if you take that moment out, all the things that came before it, first of all, don't make any sense. And you're insulting the character who has to do all these other things. So I said, if you take all that out, then Richard's just a jackass for the first half of the show. I remember him saying, well, most people write A to B to C. I write A to B to X. And I said, I don't know what that means, you know. And I said to Jane, I can't write like that. That doesn't make any sense. She said, well, what do we do? I said, there's only one thing to do. We have to quit. Top 10 show, actor and writer.
Well, you also quit a show called Nurses after 3 months because of how brutally you and Jane were being treated.
No regrets about that at all.
You obviously needed a very thick skin to be a television writer or even to work in the industry at all.
You do. And it's funny because from the beginning, I've never felt like I worked. This is just me having fun and getting paid for it, really. And the 2 occasions where I quit something, Anything But Love was a mistake, but I learned from that, so that's okay. And if I hadn't quit that, I wouldn't have gone into development and discovered the I Love Lucy pilot, so that'll work out fine. But the other thing on that Nurses show, I learned very quickly, life is too short. And if I'm not going to enjoy what I'm doing, I don't want to do it.
Good for you.
There were people running that show who had no business running a show, didn't know what they were doing, treated all the writers like garbage. And I couldn't take it after a while. I just couldn't take it. One by one, that started out with a big, long staff of people. And every week somebody would get fired for no reason. They were all great writers who went on to executive produce Home Improvement, Coach, all these other big, big shows. It's not like they were terrible writers. They were all very good writers. But one by one, fired. And it came down to Bruce Ferber, who we talked about, Jane and me. That was the writing staff. It started out as 12 people. It was now 3. And it just got worse and worse and worse to the point where at 3 a.m. one night, Bruce said, what are you thinking, Billy? I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I'm hoping, because the office was right on the street almost. I said, I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I'm hoping a car runs through this window and kills me right now. And he said, I'll get my car if you promise I die too. And we laughed like lunatics. And the woman in charge got mad at us and sent us home. And we thought that's all it took to go home finally. Yeah, I didn't regret leaving that show at all. I never watched it either. Everything about it was just wrong. It took me a while to want to write again because the fun of it had been knocked out, and it was an assembly line that had nothing to do with being creative and nothing to do with being funny. And I was like, no, life's too short. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that anymore. And I'm never doing that again.
Well, so thank heavens it didn't happen again.
Yeah.
One of the most amazing things about you and Jane is the speed with which you write. You've been able to write entire plays in a matter of days. And in the case of the TV show Suddenly Susan, if I read your book correctly, you were given 2 weeks to put on a show together from scratch and have it ready to air. And the same thing happened on the Wayans Brothers show when you were given only 6 weeks to air time. So my question is, why do you even consider taking these kinds of jobs?
If something scares me, I usually think it's the right move. So when they said, would you like to take over the Wayans Brothers? That was the first one that we did fast. Most writers on a TV show, you have about 2 weeks or almost 3 weeks if it's run right. to write a first draft of whatever script that you've already worked out with the producers. We would write ours in 2 days and then spend the rest of the time going to lunch and going whatever, anything. But anyway, so they knew we were fast writers at Warner Brothers. And the Wayans brothers had supposedly been in trouble in terms of there was a start date that couldn't be moved. It was the brand new WB network. That show had to air that night. 6 weeks prior, the studio and the network had not seen any scripts. They didn't have a cast. They didn't have anything. So they brought Jane and me in. I thought, well, can we do this? We've written plays fast. Yeah, let's do it. So we pulled that together in 6 weeks. And our reward for that was when suddenly Susan was in trouble. They called us and they used that to get us to do that job. But what we didn't know on Suddenly Susan was we literally had, I think the meeting was on a Friday, and we didn't know we were taking a meeting to do the show. We thought we were giving notes on a show that wasn't working. And we went into the meeting, and the head of the network stood up and thanked Billy and Jane for taking over the show. And we had never worked for NBC. And it was like, well, how do we say we're not doing this? We're never going to work for NBC again. So we sort of jumped in. We had Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to create the show and write it and cast it and change the sets around because the sets were already built for a different show. So on Monday, we turned in the script. 2 weeks from the day they conned us into that meeting, we turned in an edited, finished version, and it got picked up for the fall schedule.
You know what I think? I think that being known as fast writers was a mixed blessing, because I got the feeling from your book that you and Jane were often hired to clean up other people's messes.
Yeah. Not that writing is easy at all, but rewriting is so much easier than starting with a blank piece of paper to me. And I always, anybody who's ever written for us, all I want is write your first draft, just write it. You don't have to labor over it, because I don't believe in writer's block. I just never did.
You never get writer's block?
No. I'll write, and what I write may be atrocious, but I'll have written it, and then I can look at it the next day and go, no, that's wrong. Fix this, fix that. That doesn't belong there. And then I sort of whittle away at it like it's a big lump of clay until I finally have the statue I wanted,
Well, you said in your book, when you were talking about how fast you write, you said, I'm quoting you here, sometimes when you don't have time to think and second guess yourself, the craft itself can get you through. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people ponder way too much and they start overanalyzing. But when you have no time to write, and if you've been doing it long enough, you have a craft, and the craft takes over. And structurally, there's only one way to structure something, for what you're doing. If it doesn't advance the story, take it out. There's little things that stick in the back of your head. So as you're writing, I don't have time to question whether that's the best joke or not. I just get it done. Then I go back and fix stuff. I always think it's easier to rewrite than write. So just slap down that first draft and then clean it up.
Do you think you've got any idea how good you are?
No.
At what you do?
No, I don't. It's funny. Most of the time, I don't even think of myself as a writer. I still think of myself as an actor who's writing things.
I want to ask you about your experience working on Martin Lawrence's show. You and Jane co-executive produced the first season. When the show won an NAACP Image Award for Best New Series, you and Jane were asked not to attend the awards ceremony, obviously because you were white, even though you wrote most of the scripts. Billy, this was jaw-dropping. If a black writer were excluded from an awards ceremony like you were, it would have been unconscionable and there would have been hell to pay. Has the polarization between white and black in Hollywood actually come to this?
I honestly didn't give it any thought. I didn't experience what the African-American friends of mine have experienced in their past and all that sort of thing. So it was fine with me. It was slightly insulting at first. And then I thought, I don't need to have this moment. It's fine. That's sort of how I feel. I've got so many other things going on. I don't care if I get an award at all.
But you get my point.
I do.
Well, let's talk about Don Rickles. I've been waiting for this moment. You and Jane created his sitcom called Daddy Dearest. This chapter in your book had me laughing out loud so frequently that I actually had to wear Depends. What a feeling it must have been for a comedy writer to write for a legend like Don Rickles.
We were lucky enough on the Newhart show. One of the episodes we wrote, we guest starred Don Rickles, and to me, well, to everybody, he's a legend. And anytime when I was a kid, if he was on the Tonight Show, that was a special event. And my father loved him, and so that was it was a big, big thing. So when I finally wrote the episode for Newhart, I got to know Don a little bit. But then Richard Lewis asked us to write the pilot for Daddy Dearest, and we had worked with him on Anything But Love. We knew what we were getting into, and I said to Jane, I said, look, if we're going to write a Don Rickles show, we're not going to do what other people have done. We're going to write a Don Rickles show. We're not going to try and pretend he doesn't do what he does. So we wrote this thing. Boy, did I enjoy that. I enjoyed him so much. The audiences liked us, loved us. The critics just hated us. I have a stack of insulting reviews, probably an inch and a half thick, that I was gonna put in the book. And Jane talked me out of it. She said, it's not funny, Billy. I said, it's hilariously funny. These are the most insulting reviews anyone has ever gotten, because it was politically incorrect. And that was at the beginning of the height of being politically incorrect. And Fox tried to change our show. They bought the show that we wrote, and then they panicked, I guess, and they wanted to change Don into a kindly grandfather role. And it's like, no.
Well, the chapter in your book about Daddy Dearest was extremely frustrating to read. The network buys a show that you've dreamed up, then they make you change it to a totally different show, then they cancel it because it isn't the show they thought they were buying, even though you delivered exactly the show that they made you write. How do you keep your sanity working in an industry where nobody seems to know what they want?
The way we've done it is I go back east and I do a new play. Sam Bobrick, a playwright who did Murder at the Howard Johnsons and a bunch of other things, he hired Jane and me to do a backup script for a sitcom based on Louis Anderson's life. He sat me down one day, and I wish I'd listened to him. He said, you're a playwright, right? And I said, yeah. He said, so you're used to being the top of the pyramid. Everybody in the theater works to please you. Welcome to television. You are a blueprint, and everyone's going to tell you what you did wrong all week long. The sooner you accept that, the easier this job is going to be. And I went, yeah. And then I got on Newhart, and they changed hello to hi, and it was like, what's wrong with that? Took me a while. But what we would do, and we did it for almost 35 years, is we would do our TV, where you're constantly being told what you do wrong by different groups of people. And then when most people would go to Paris or Hawaii or whatever on their break, Jane and I would fly back to New Jersey, where we're from, and we'd put on a play. Like you said, we did 23 plays altogether between the two of us. And then
that's how you kept your sanity.
That was it.
Well, I have to tell you, as funny as your book is, it's also shocking on numerous levels. The egos of some of the stars, the level of abuse that writers take from incompetent, disorganized studio executives, the poor judgment of the top decision makers about what's funny, what's likely to be a hit show, what kinds of stories the public will enjoy. Billy, the impression I got from your book is that there's no rhyme or reason to the casting, the programming decisions made by studio executives. Who are these incompetent people? How do they get their jobs?
That I don't know. But the faces change enough to the point where, I stepped away. I wanted to bring some of our plays off Broadway, and I came back the following season, and I realized that the people who were now in charge had no idea who I was. I was like, I was only gone a year,
Is this after your twins were born?
Yeah.
You scaled back your executive producing and you became a consultant on other people's shows so you could spend more time with your kids. And you said it wasn't a good career move. Is that why?
Yeah, exactly. So once I started consulting, which means, 2 or 3 days a week, you would go on somebody else's show simply as a script doctor, really. And you wouldn't have to make any decisions. You just they would say, we need something better in this scene. And you come up with some jokes and then you go home at whatever time. But the second you start doing that, the powers that be forget that you used to create and executive produce your own shows. So when it comes time for looking for executive producers, they skip you.
So there's no corporate memory because
No.
the turnover among the studio executives is almost constant. So no one
Yeah.
remembers what you did even 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this industry is just so brutal.
It is. And the thing I've learned through all these years is nobody knows anything. Nobody really, there's no rules of how anything works. There's everybody's sort of micromanaging now, sort of to prove that their job exists for a reason. But when I first started, you would be hired to be the creative person, and then they'd leave you alone. And you'd hear from a censor saying, you can't say the word damn. I was like, oh, okay. That was it. And if the ratings weren't good, the show got canceled. That was the way it should have worked. And then as the years went on, it got more and more micromanaged.
With everything you've been through, with all your experience, have you been able to figure out the formula for what makes a hit show?
No, because I think a lot of things that have been canceled or not picked up should have worked and would work if somebody would just say yes. It's all arbitrary. A lot of things get on the air because you created a hit show last year and it's not necessarily a good show this year, but they have to please that guy. You know, two of the best things we ever wrote have never seen the light of day because we couldn't get anybody to see the same thing we were trying to show them. But luckily, the plays and now the book, I've got different avenues to go down. And if one thing doesn't work, you move to the other thing. And I don't think about the things that got away, except for the fact that, oh, that would have been a good one.
So are you now at the stage of your life where you pick and choose what projects you'll do?
Yeah. I've been lucky that way. Once Suddenly Susan hit syndication, I really didn't have to worry about where the next check was ever going to come from. And that makes you lazy too. There's something about starting out and, you know, writing on your kitchen table because you can't afford an office. You just be creative to be creative. And after a while, it's like, oh, I could go on vacation instead of having to bump out something. Oh, let me go do that.
Would you ever again agree to be the executive producer on somebody else's show?
Yeah.
You would?
Yeah, I would. If it was somebody I respected, yeah. If it was just, you know, you're going to be on this person's show and I don't like them, that's very important.
Well, given the success of Get in the Car, Jane, do you think you'll write any more books? Because you're a very gifted author.
Thank you. I've actually I just finished a novella, which I'm in the process of fine tuning right now, and it'll make a good movie, which is also the idea. And I'm going to do a version of Get in the Car, Jane, regarding our plays and all the stories that go on backstage at all the shows. So I'm also doing that in the works too. So once I wrote this, I was like, oh, I can do this. Let me write another one, you know.
Will you please come back on our show when the next book comes out?
Happy to. Absolutely happy to.
Because, Billy, this conversation about the inner workings of the sitcom world has been really fascinating. Your book is such a gem. It made me laugh more than any sitcom I've ever seen in a long, long time. Thank you so much for coming on our show. I hope you will come back with every new project.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Our guest has been actor, playwright, television writer, and producer and author Billy Van Zandt. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneinterviews.com.